Hello, and welcome to a Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness video, where today we're going to be completing the game with the pairing of Solrock and Lunatone. Now, in previous videos, I have found that Solrock is incredibly good, being the third best Pokemon overall, and Lunatone, while not being as good, still does find itself in the S tier. So I think that the pairing of these two is going to be phenomenal, and might even find themselves at the top of the tier list, though Jirachi is a very hard Pokemon to beat. But let's go ahead and jump right into it. For base stats, Solrock has 70 HP, 95 attack, 85 defense, 55 special attack, 65 special defense, and 70 speed, whereas Solrock has 70 HP, 55 attack, 65 defense, 95 special attack, 85 special defense, and 70 speed as well. So Solrock is more of a physical attacker, whereas Lunatone is more of a special attacker. So I'm really hoping that these two working together cover each other's backs and really make up for the issues that running them solo had. Now, Solrock does have a few advantages in a moveset, and that's because it has access to what I would consider the best move in the game, Rock Slide, and with it being a rock type, it also gets Stab, so it's going to be incredibly powerful. And unlike Lunatone, it gets access to a lot of fire type moves, including Flamethrower, Fire Blast, and even Sunny Day, which if I were to run, I would be able to use Solar Beam effectively, though the grass type isn't really that great in this game. On the flip side, we have Lunatone, who mostly gets access to normal and psychic type moves. However, it does get access to Ice Beam and Rain Dance, and Ice Beam is incredibly useful against the dragons in the late game, as well as both of them get Earthquake, which is just a powerful ground type move, and with both having Levitate, I don't have to worry about damaging my own Pokemon. So with that, let's go ahead and get right into it. And right off the bat, I forgot to record the normal stat screen, so I'll just go over it here. Solrock has a Brave Nature, raising its attack but lowering speed, which will help it hit a little bit harder, but it is going to be a bit slower. However, that does help with it not being in constant speed ties with Lunatone. And Lunatone has a Naive Nature, raising its speed but lowering its special defense, which with how slow they are is going to be quite nice. They both get the Levitate ability, making them immune to ground type moves. And according to Bulbapedia, they get Tackle, Harden, and Confusion by level 10. So with that, let's go ahead and move on. And the first thing I do is go over to the tutor lady to go teach the move Mimic, and that's because I want a way to actually deal with dark types that isn't just Tackle, and also I need a way to deal with steel types in the future. At level 13, both Solrock and Lunatone get the move Rock Throw, and we go ahead and move right along to the Power Rangers because honestly the fight with the old man was super easy. Now, one of the biggest issues with both of these Pokemon is the fact that when you have to rely on a move like Rock Throw to deal damage, you are going to miss quite a bit because it is only 90% accurate, and so it's nice to have a partner Pokemon that can deal consistent damage. Inside the Cypher base, I go ahead and pick up the Nubble because it's holding the Charcoal item that raises fire type damage by 10%. And then at level 19, Lunatone gets Hypnosis, which I decide to teach but don't really use. We go into the battle against Laverna. She leads with a Love Disc and a Beautifly, and I go for Rock Throw into the Beautifly and Confusion into the Love Disc, and that's because I should be able to take down the Beautifly in a single hit with Rock Throw, which it comes out and does just that. Out comes the Roselia. Now the Roselia is an issue for both these Pokemon individually, however together with two Confusions I should be able to take it down fairly easily. Confusion from the Lunatone nearly takes it down, and Solrock finishes the job, bringing out her final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Delcatty. Now this thing's always a threat because it is fairly fast, and it always deals quite a bit of damage. However, it decides to attack Solrock, which is more physically defensive, so it doesn't really do that much damage. Unfortunately, I'm not able to take it down in a single turn, so it does hit another Shadow Rush, finishing Solrock off. Confusion finishes the job, and then all that's left is the Love Disc. And even with a crit, it wouldn't have been able to finish me off, so I beat Laverna on the first attempt. Now, of course, you can't have a Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness video without the obligatory Mirror B. How are you doing today, Mirror B? Well, it's always good to see ya. At level 25, both Lunatone and Solrock get Psywave, so I decide to teach it to both of them, and this will be a way for me to actually deal with Pokemon that just resist my Psychic type moves, or in a few cases actually quadruple resist. I pick up the Ralts here for the Twisted Spoon item, and then I go to the Realgam Tower to go pick up my two favorite TMs, Hidden Power and Protect, and I'm going to teach Hidden Power right away. So Solrock gets Hidden Power Rock, which I would say is pretty decent. Unfortunately, it's only 38 base power, so it is going to be weaker than Rock Throw. However, it does have the benefit of being 100% accurate. So in instances where I don't think I need the extra power, it is going to be the better move to go for. Lunatone, on the other hand, gets Hidden Power Bug at 52 base power, which could definitely come in handy for dealing with other Psychic types or Dark types. And at the Tutor Lady, I pick up the move Body Slam for Solrock. Now right before the next boss fight, I decide to teach Ice Beam to Lunatone, and I'm going to teach this over Psywave, which I might come to regret. Anyway, going into the battle against Snaddle, he leads with a Lantern and a Quagsire. I go for Ice Beam into the Quagsire, dealing about half to it, and Body Slam doesn't quite finish it off, so it does survive on a sliver, but it misses its Rock Tomb, so I don't have my speed lowered. But because it's paralyzed now, I decide to focus on the Lantern because it is doing super effective damage with Water Gun, and there is a good chance that Quagsire is just going to be paralyzed. Now I go for Psywave into the Lantern and Confusion to finish it off. However, because Lunatone's speed got dropped, Solrock is now faster, so I accidentally messed up the turn order there. So Lunatone comes out without any damage being done to it, though Psywave did miss anyway. It sets up Shadow Sky because it's now faster than everything. Psywave does almost nothing, and Hidden Power Bug only takes it down to half. And with the way this battle is going, I don't think there's a good chance I win, so I decide to go for something a little risky, and I'm actually going to try to catch Lunatone here. Now normally I wouldn't do this because it kind of takes away from the battle if I could just catch the Pokemon. However, in this case, because it's holding the item that raises rock type damage, and it's also a fellow Lunatone, I see this as a funny thing to do that just happened to work. Anyway, with that, we get a little bit further into the battle. Quagsire goes down, and he's down to his final two Pokemon, Matang and Castform. And Castform goes for Weather Ball, taking Lunatone down to 16, and Metal Claw finishes off Lunatone. So now it's a 1v1 with Solrock and Matang, and Solrock really just has to rely on Psywave here. Metal Claw hits, taking it down to 11, and Psywave does quite a bit of damage. But unless Matang misses, which it does have a 5% chance to do, never mind, it swapped over to Thunder Punch. Okay, well, a pretty good first attempt, but after another attempt that went way worse, I decided to go to Mount Battle to do a little bit of training, and that's to get the moves Rock Slide and Psychic at level 37, which is going to change the outcome of this battle drastically. So with Psychic, I can now nearly take down Lantern on the first turn, and Body Slam finishes it off, bringing out the Lunatone. Quagsire hits a Rock Tomb, lowering Lunatone's speed, which unfortunately means that it's slower than the opposing Lunatone. So I go for Rock Slide, which also unfortunately misses Lunatone. Go for Hidden Power Bug, which is now doing well over half to Lunatone. But the great thing about the move Rock Slide is that on top of being a fairly accurate rock move as well as a spread move, I believe it has a 30% chance to flinch, with its only drawback being that it is 90% accurate, which is still really good. Now I did decide to pick up the Lunatone once again in this fight because I really want that extra 10% damage on rock type moves. That will just make Solrock even more powerful throughout the game, and should just allow it to tear through most of the game with ease. Now I still don't really have a great move for Matang, so I decide to go for Rock Slide hoping for a flinch, but instead I get a crit, taking it down very low, and Ice Beam just finishes it off. So we beat Snaddle third attempt. At the SS Libra, I pick up the TM for Flamethrower and teach that over Psywave to help deal with those steel types I was having issues with, and then I go on to the battle against Gonzap. He leads with an Electrode and a Nuzleaf. The Nuzleaf uses Fake Out on Solrock, and Spark hits it as well. Luckily it doesn't get paralyzed. Electrode goes down to a single Psychic from Lunatone, and then out comes Vileplume. Go for another Psychic, taking down the Vileplume, bringing out the Whiscash. I go for Rock Slide, which doesn't really do that much to Whiscash, but does do quite a bit of damage to Nuzleaf. Go for another Psychic, which takes the Whiscash down to a sliver. Rock Slide finishes the job on both. And then that brings out his final Pokemon, which is a Skarmory. Now, with Ice Beam and Flamethrower, there should be no problem. Ice Beam takes it down to low yellow, and Flamethrower finishes it off, so we beat Gonzap easily first try. At the top of the pyramid, I pick up the TM for Earthquake, which I teach over Hidden Power, and then I go into the battle against Gorgon. He leads with a Celio and a Lairon, and because both of my Pokemon are levitating, the Celio isn't going to go for Earthquake, and the Lairon isn't going to go for Protect, so I just go for Earthquake on the first turn to take down the Lairon immediately, which also puts Celio in range for Rock Slide to finish it off. And honestly, that's kind of the strategy for the rest of the Gorgon fight, because none of his Pokemon are going to use Protect. I can just keep using Earthquake and Rock Slide to deal massive damage to his Pokemon. Well, except for the Primate because it resists Rock, but I finish that off easily with a Psychic, which brings out Hypno, which takes another Rock Slide. And then I can use another Earthquake to take Hypno down to low health, and Rock Slide can finish it off. Which it doesn't miss, and we beat Gorgon on the first try super easily. Now these two Pokemon are obviously doing incredibly well, so let's just see how they do in the endgame. Now at level 49, Solrock gains an incredibly dangerous move in Explosion. Super powerful, but if I misclick, I might just take myself down. Now I go into the battle against Lovrina. She leads with a Gardevoir and a Gorbis, and I go for Psychic into Gorbis because I remember it has a lower special defense. Go for Rock Slide, which luckily gets a crit taking down Gardevoir, and also gets a crit on Roselia taking it down in a single hit as well. Okay, well that's super lucky. Out comes Shadow Altaria and Shadow Farfetch'd. Go for Ice Beam to take down the Farfetch'd immediately, that way it can't hit a Shadow Panic, and then Rock Slide takes down Altaria. And so we beat Lovrina super easily. I decide to teach Protect to Lunatone now over Rock Throw, and then I go into the battle against Greevil. He leads with a Matang and a Quagsire this time. Go for Ice Beam into the Quagsire, not quite taking it down, but go for a Rock Slide, which also doesn't quite take down either of his Pokemon. He hits a Waterfall and a Metal Claw, dealing quite a bit of damage to Solrock. Psychic finishes off the Quagsire, so Snaddle sends in Scizor. Go for Flamethrower into Scizor to take it down immediately. And then that brings out another Solrock. Hello, other Solrock. Metal Claw deals a decent amount of damage to Lunatone. Go for Ice Beam into the Solrock, which takes it down to low yellow. Go for Flamethrower into Matang to take it down. Unfortunately, this does mean that the Solrock is able to set up Shadow Sky, which is going to boost the power of Shadow-type moves. But I don't think it's really going to matter. Go for Ice Beam to take down the Solrock. Then that brings out his Shadow Starmie. Always a big threat, but I go for Rock Slide, which doesn't deal as much damage as I thought it would. Fruity Pebbles rain down. Now even with Shadow Sky active, I don't think the Starmie can take down either of my Pokemon. Okay, that was actually very close. I didn't expect that to do so much damage. But with the combined efforts of Solrock and Lunatone, we beat Snaddle, and we move on to Ardos. He leads with a Swellow and an Alakazam. And unfortunately, neither of my Pokemon outspeed his lead Pokemon. So I do want to take down this Swellow as quick as possible though, because it could have used Shadow Half instead of Shadow Sky, which is something that I really don't want. Alakazam surprisingly survives a Rock Slide, despite its frailty. I go for Psychic to take down the Kingdra, which it does, bringing out his Heracross. And while Heracross is neutral to Rock Slide, it does do half. Alakazam unfortunately avoids the Rock Slide, so it is going to survive another turn, allowing it another chance to possibly freeze one of my Pokemon. Luckily it doesn't. Go for Psychic to take down the Heracross, and then out comes the Shadow Electabuzz, which will also outspeed both of my Pokemon. Now Rock Slide doesn't quite do half to Electabuzz. Luckily I do take down the Alakazam, bringing out Shadow Snorlax, so hopefully the Electabuzz plays nice and goes for Shadow Mist, which it does, just lowering my evasiveness, allowing me to use Earthquake to take it down and deal a little bit of damage to Snorlax. Rock Slide comes out, taking Snorlax down to low yellow. Lunatone goes down, unfortunately. But at this point, Body Slam should be enough to finish it off, and I beat Ardos pretty easily. Moving on to the rematch against Gorgon, he leads with a Slowking and an Ursaring. I go for Psychic on the first turn, taking Ursaring down to low health, and then I go for Rock Slide to finish it off, unfortunately missing the Slowking. Aggron comes out, Water Pulse hits Lunatone, unfortunately confusing Lunatone, so it gets off the Earthquake anyway though, taking Slowking down a little under half and Aggron down to a sliver. Rock Slide finishes off Aggron and takes Slowking down really low. Then out comes Walrein. Go for Psychic, unfortunately Lunatone hits itself, go for Rock Slide, taking down the Slowking, and it does quite a bit of damage to Walrein. Out comes Poliwrath. Now Poliwrath is a fighting type, so I go for Psychic, which does take it down in a single hit, which brings out his final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Mr. Mime. Go for Rock Slide, Walrein goes down, and all that's left is the Shadow Mr. Mime, which should go down to basically anything. Lunatone hits itself in confusion, Shadow Storm comes out doing very little to both, and Body Slam finishes the job. With that, we go ahead and move on to Eldis. He leads with a Manectric and a Ninjask. Now, this is a battle I'm a little worried about because the Ninjask does have Silver Wind, which has a chance to raise all of its stats. And while I do want to use Rock Slide, I really don't want to take down Ninjask immediately, because then that brings out 2 of his dragons at the same time. The plan there was for Earthquake to finish off an Electric, and then I start dealing damage to Salamence while also taking down the Ninjask, which might seem about the same effect, but I really wanted to see how much Rock Slide would actually do to Salamence. But in this case, I don't get that luck, so I have to finish it off with Ice Beam. Go for another Rock Slide, which misses Marowak, but does deal a little bit of damage to Flygon. Now I go for Ice Beam into Marowak, and that's because Marowak has the possibility to hit a very strong Shadow End because it's holding the Thick Club item, doubling its attack stat, whereas Flygon really can't take down either of my Pokemon unless it got a crit. So on the following turn, I take it down with Ice Beam, and then all that's left is Lapras, and it goes down to a Rock Slide. So moving on to the big box legendary, Shadowlogia, and with Rock Slide, once again, this should be a pretty easy fight. Ice Beam takes it down about a third, and Rock Slide takes it down to just a sliver. Now, I do decide to go for Protect here, which luckily it went for Shadow Blast into Lunatone, so it goes down without dealing more damage. And then I go into the battle against the final boss, Gravel. He leads with a Rhydon and a Moltres. I go for Ice Beam immediately, taking Rhydon down. Out comes Executor. And unfortunately, Moltres does actually outspeed Solrock, dealing a ton of damage to it. But with a 4 times super effective Rock Slide, it takes down the Fiery Bird very quickly. Then out comes Tauros, lowering my attack, which means that I might not be able to take down the next Pokemon as efficiently. Go for Ice Beam to take down Executor, while the Tauros sets up Shadow Sky. And as I suspected, Articuno isn't quite a one-shot now because of that attack drop, but hopefully Lunatone will be able to outspeed and take it down, which it does. Ice Beam does take it down, and then out comes his final Pokemon, which is Zapdos. Now it is only super effective against it, but it still does do half. So at this point, I think it comes down to a bit of luck. If the Zapdos decides to attack Solrock, I think I lose. Luckily, it decides to go after Lunatone, and Tauros goes after Solrock, so I'm able to take down the Zapdos with ease, and go for Rock Slide to finish off Tauros, giving us a first try victory, which is always satisfying. So how great did these Pokemon do? Well, they beat the game at a time of 7 hours, 21 minutes, and 20 seconds, at level 59 for Lunatone and 60 for Solrock, and they only fainted 3 times throughout the game. So after that impeccable performance, how well did they place on the tier list? Well, unfortunately they just missed second place by a little bit, and unfortunately they didn't even get close to Jirachi. But I think that makes a lot of sense, because Jirachi is a mythical Pokemon, and it really didn't struggle at any part during the game, whereas Solrock and Lunatone did have a few parts that they struggled with. The early game was a bit slow because they get Confusion, Rock Throw, and Tackle as their best damaging moves, meaning that there's some times where they don't quite get clean one-shots, or Rock Throw misses, wasting a bit of time. And of course, Snaddle was an issue for these two, because when I first entered the fight, I was only level 31, and I had to get all the way up to level 37 in order to get Rock Slide and Psychic, which in hindsight I should have just battled a few more trainers prior, or have just gone straight to Mount Battle once I had gotten to Phoenix City. Oh, and I almost forgot, how much time did we actually save compared to the solo runs? And how many feints did we end up avoiding as well? Well, solo Solrock beat the game at a time of 7 hours, 30 minutes, and 30 seconds, which means that we shaved off just about 10 minutes, which might not seem like a lot of time, but when you're in the S Plus tier, 10 minutes is actually quite a bit of time, and it shaved off 8 feints overall. Solo Lunatone, on the other hand, finished with a time of 8 hours, 18 minutes, and 44 seconds, meaning that it saved just over 55 minutes compared to its normal ranking, and it shaved off 14 losses being in this duo. Anyway, if you did enjoy watching, consider liking and subscribing. If you have any Pokemon suggestions, please put them down below. Thank you so much for watching, and bye!